Grand Wizard must get to the new kid before the Drow Elf can manipulate his land and use him to take the sacred relic from human hands. For whoever controls the stick controls the universe.
This is going to be really easy. If you like South Park, you'll probably like this game. If you hate South Park, just leave now and forever hold your peace.
Douchebag. You will now choose a class. Fighter, mage, thief, or Jew. A mage is like a wizard, only not as cool. A white thief? Never heard of one, but interesting. Jew, huh? So I guess we'll never really be friends.
I've done 2 playthroughs. My first was Jew, and my second was Fighter. I guess Jew is kind of like a debuffing class, and I found it a little more fun to use because you have to utilize your abilities more to succeed. I've heard people compare it to like a monk style class and your damage gets buffed the lower your HP is. Debuffs are very effective in the Stick of Truth, and the bleed and plagues are really potent and fun to use. The Circumscythe ability also deals bonus damage to Nazi zombies, which are the majority of the enemies you're fighting. It's a very strong ability, as when it's upgraded it sheds armor, can cause 2 levels of bleed, and gross out on every other enemy in the battle. I also felt quite strong just attacking physically, and did have access to some pretty good weapons. Fighter is definitely a more new player friendly class. It's a lot simpler to use, you just kind of grab the biggest weapon you can get the most attacks with, and you just go to town. The abilities aren't particularly strong and it emphasizes more just raw attacking. I found enemies with armor to be a lot more annoying as my fighter, because shields block individual hits, so when you have a big weapon that only hits once or twice, shields really penalize you. It's the same thing with armor. Abilities and most status effects bypass it, so if you're primarily a physical attacker, it can be a bit more difficult overall. That being said, I didn't struggle with the fighter at all. Since you can use an item every turn, I mostly just spammed Tweak Bros Coffee when I was at full health for extra turns to attack more frequently. I haven't used the other classes, but I've seen some gameplay, and a little bit of people's streams, and Mage looks very powerful, and Thief is more akin to like a Rogue or Ninja archetype with an emphasis on stuns. So everything seems viable. I would probably recommend the Jew since I found Fighter a little on the dull side, especially for a second playthrough, but my footage is all from the Fighter playthrough. The Stick of Truth has a timed hit system very similar to games like Super Mario RPG or Paper Mario. You get bonus damage and multiple attacks while attacking if you press the button at the correct time. You can block a portion of incoming damage, or power up your abilities in the same way. Successfully blocking every attack in a round allows you to perform a counterattack, which deals a little bit of extra damage, and it's a nice reward for successfully blocking everything in conjunction with the reduced damage. It's great! It's just a really easy way to keep the player engaged while doing the fairly monotonous tasks that RPG battles usually devolve into. It's satisfying to block an attack that would have killed you, and you survive, and it's awesome to get bonus damage that kills an enemy when you would have taken an additional round to do it. It's just a really satisfying mechanic and it's great. I think more RPG should put it in because it's so simple, and adds so much to the game for basically nothing. Well, traditional RPGs are kind of going the way of the dodo, but you know. There's some really great aspects of the way South Park, the Stick of Truth is designed besides the timed hits. So firstly, there are no random encounters. One of the worst parts of any RPG is usually the huge amount of random battles or trash mobs you need to slog through in order to get to the interesting parts. A lot of battles can be avoided, which greatly improves the overall pace and flow if you choose to avoid them. Second, there are ways to win battles before they even start. This usually manifests as using some kind of environmental hazard, like farting into lamps, or shooting down parts of the room to knock out enemies. Sometimes it results in a total win, sometimes it just removes 1 or 2 opponents from the next battle. Either of those is a huge bonus. Even if you don't directly remove enemies from the battle, you can get initiative and stun enemies by hitting them with your ranged attack before you even start the battle, and that's great. The best part of using the world kills is that they reward you exactly as if you had fought the battle. You get EXP, money, and whatever pickups you would have gotten. This allows you to bypass a huge amount of the rather slow-paced battles while still being rewarded as if you fought them. That makes the game have a much better pacing than a standard RPG, and in conjunction with the shorter runtime, it makes it a really tight game. So the Stick of Truth starts with a pretty basic tutorial in the beginning, but a really good aspect of it is that you can't proceed until you get it right. This means you are introduced to all of the core mechanics, and you have to do them at least once perfectly to understand them before the game lets you proceed. I did struggle with some of the farting tutorials, mainly the sneaky squeaker with Randy in the bathroom. This one felt really odd because the tutorial didn't really behave the same way you use it in game. Using it in game is easy as heck. but the tutorial just felt really off and different for some reason. That was really atypical. Most of the tutorials were easy to grasp, and even if you messed it up, you're usually rewarded with some funny dialogue at the very least, which can soften the blow of messing up, at least the first couple times. So this is kind of like Metal Gear Solid 5, where I really only found one buddy to be useful. I mostly just used Butters. I found his ability set and overall power and defense to be significantly better and more complementary to the fighter class, but I even used him on my first playthrough as Jew. Fighter has a lot of abilities that cause the pissed off status effect, which is basically a taunt in any other game. So Butters' healing touch can help out with you getting attacked more often. Some of the buddies just feel kind of weak, honestly, especially depending on your class. I think most of the buddies are designed to complement a certain class choice. Stan is clearly a warrior type, which is most likely meant to complement a mage, which lacks the raw physical power you'd want. Like I said, Butters has a nice balance of healing, defense, offense, and some powerful, easy to use abilities. I found him to be the best overall buddy. I only ever deviated a handful of times or when it forced me to. Since I opted to try allying with Kyle this time around, I did use Jimmy for a bit, but once I got Butters back, pretty much stayed with him for the rest of the game. There's a lot of stuff you can do and find in the Stick of Truth. Simply fighting battles isn't enough to power up your character. You'll need to make friends on Facebook to power up your abilities. You can make friends by just talking to people standing around South Park, progressing through the main storyline, and doing some optional objectives. That's a really nice way of letting you progress without direct combat. Gathering friends gets you power-ups to your abilities, which justifies the effort of finding them. Sometimes the upgrades are minor, like getting some health back on certain abilities. Other times they're actually insanely strong, like adding a status effect or armor shredding to an attack. The system is really good because you can tailor it to your tastes. If you prefer using one ability over the other, you can focus into upgrading that one. I found that I totally avoided certain abilities, but others I'd want at max as soon as possible. Then I'd work on another one when I took it as far as I could. Then after I maxed it, I'd work on another one. On my Jew, I fully upgraded Circumscythe and the Plagues of Egypt and basically ignored Whirling Doom. On my fighter, I maxed out Rochambeau, then kind of ignored stuff until Ground Stomp became available. I think the fighter's abilities are significantly weaker than the other classes. Damage over time status effects are insanely powerful in the Stick of Truth. Grossed Out is essentially poison, and it prevents the enemy from healing, which is useful in a handful of circumstances, but enemies don't really heal that much overall. Bleeding is a standard damage over time, but it can stack up to 5 times for insane amounts of damage. Burning is another damage over time, which also amplifies the next magic attack on an enemy, but consumes the burning effect. And they all stack together. You can have Grossed Out, Bleed, and Burning all on a single enemy. They all seem to bypass enemy defenses and armor, so you can deal a huge amount of damage without even really attacking, even if your enemy has a huge amount of stacked defenses. It's one of the reasons I felt that the Jew class was so powerful. You can wear incredibly defensive armor and use damage over times. Circumscythe can be upgraded to cause your primary target to get a 2x stack of bleed and every other enemy to get grossed out. So you've instantly placed damage over times on the entire enemy team, as well as significantly debuff the primary target. Plagues of Egypt is absolutely insane. It can inflict 2 status effects per turn when fully upgraded, as well as buffing your party or debuffing the enemy. The Jew also does kosher or holy damage for most of its special abilities. It's really potent against Nazi zombies, which you fight for a large portion of the game. It's also kind of why Butters stands up well, because he also does a lot of holy damage. But seriously, play the Jew class. There's also an achievement that's exclusive to it. Definitely the best praise you can give South Park The Stick of Truth is that it feels exactly like a season of South Park, or at least a multi-part episode. The art looks exactly like it should. The sound, voice acting, music, and writing is exactly what you'd expect from the show. It's no doubt because of the direct involvement of Trey Parker and Matt Stone. It's great because they clearly care about South Park and they aren't going to let the studio do something they aren't comfortable with. Apparently they worked for 4 years on The Stick of Truth, which apparently included some legal battles for the rights, but it's definitely a good thing they went through with it the whole way, because if they didn't, I think it would have been a significantly worse game. In terms of the game itself, there's some stuttering and lag on the PS3 version. The load times are also a bit slow from time to time. I think you'd be better off playing on PC if possible, obviously depending on your specs. There are some things that are just like nice solutions to small problems, like hints and directions going on your Facebook wall for you to check out at your leisure. When you get pepper sprayed trying to recruit token, Cartman posts on your wall, and then Jimbo posts below letting you know that you need to go to the gun shop next to progress. It's just a really nice solution to giving you directions without really hammering it in your face. Overall, the presentation of The Stick of Truth is A+. Great presentation. I think the Stick of Truth is on the easy side, but I think that's also intentional. The different classes play quite differently, so there needs to be a baseline that any class can get through, and I think it succeeds in that regard. South Park has a great EXP curve, because if you're fighting the battles as they come, or just winning via world hazards, you're always adequately equipped to deal with the next challenge, which is actually excellent design. Nothing really stands out as like being the hardest part. I imagine some of the optional content is probably significantly harder than the mandatory stuff, but I didn't do much of it. I know at least one optional boss is Al Gore as Man Bear Pig, so he could probably be a lot harder than the real final boss. Shelly is another optional boss. I found the first time I attempted her difficult, but after progressing a bit I went back and I beat her pretty easily. Any part when you're solo without a buddy can also be more challenging. There's only really two parts where this happens, which is the alien abducting segment and the part with the underpants gnomes. It's not super challenging, but it requires a little more thought than the parts where you have a buddy for some extra damage or healing potential. Princess Kenny is probably the hardest part I did because of the way you need to buddy shuffle, which is a mechanic you don't ever really need to use throughout the main game. I used Butters for the majority of the game, so I also wasn't really familiar with the other buddies' abilities, but your mileage is gonna vary. I don't think the Stick of Truth is something you play for the challenge. I think it's something you play primarily for the entertainment value. That being said, there is a harder difficulty which, from what I've read, requires you to have a more intimate knowledge of the game's mechanics and the battles. That's a nice little thing for replay value if you want a more difficult game. The Stick of Truth is a fairly standard 8 hours, but unlike a lot of the games I've talked about, it's really paced well. There are a lot of conveniences. You got Timmy's fast travel system, and being able to outright avoid battles, or even using items to beat them in a single turn is really great. I think the fact that it's largely a comedy is actually quite helpful for the pacing. You're always wondering what stupid thing is going to happen next, and every segment is consistently entertaining and funny. Whether it's going to get meth for Tweak Bros coffee, going to the abortion clinic, or going after underpants gnomes, everything is genuinely funny and entertaining. I didn't touch much of the optional content, but there is quite a bit of it. You go down into the sewer and find Mr. Hanky's family, do some big game hunts for Jimbo, you can fight Man Bear Pig, you can climb the Tower of Peace and fight Mongolians. The only thing I really did was the Tower of Peace, which was still pretty funny. It was good. So in Stick of Truth you play as the new kid who just moved to South Park, and he's promptly named Douchebag by Cartman. You join their role-playing game and pick your class. You find out that the KKK, or the Kingdom of Koopa Keep, is locked in eternal combat with the Elf Kingdom over control of the Stick of Truth. After the first day in South Park, Douchebag gets abducted by aliens and breaks out with the help of Randy Marsh, and the UFO crashes into the mall. Government agents attempt to cover up the crash site by saying that they're building a new Taco Bell. They also plan on blowing up South Park as a way to completely cover up the incident. The alien crash has caused green goo to spread across South Park, which turns people and animals into Nazi zombies. Douchebag wakes up and finds that the elves have stolen the stick, and you need to ally yourself with the KKK or the elves and recruit soldiers. Then a battle ensues at the school. Clyde steals the Stick of Truth because Cartman banished him from space and time. The KKK and elves form an alliance to take on Clyde, but are promptly sent home because it's bedtime. There are a lot of events here, but most of it is about recruiting the various cliques to battle Clyde's army of Nazi zombies, which involves going to the abortion clinic to find out who is spreading rumors about the girls, so they'll join, getting a passport and going to Canada, and recruiting anyone else willing to fight Clyde. So then the group fights their way up Clyde's tower and has to abort the nuclear bomb which has been implanted inside Mr. Slave. So Douchebag has to go inside Mr. Slave's ass because he's the only one capable of performing an abortion and shrinking down to small size, which the game really emphasizes. After that, the final encounter with Clyde happens, and you need to fight a revived, zombie Nazi version of Chef. Government agents arrive and reveal that Douchebag has the uncanny ability to make friends on Facebook, which is why he had to move to South Park and go into hiding. The government agent learns about the power of the Stick of Truth, steals it, and goes insane. Princess Kenny betrays the group and injects himself with the goo, turning him into a Nazi zombie. Douchebag then defeats Princess Kenny by farting on his balls, which you've been told multiple times throughout the game not to do. The resulting explosion destroys the green goo, and all the Nazi zombies, and life in South Park goes back to normal. Honestly, I don't have a lot to say here. It's basically exactly what you'd expect from a season of South Park, or at least one of the multi-part episodes. It's very much a take it or leave it kind of thing. I think it was fantastic. There are a lot of throwbacks to older episodes like the aliens and the Nazi zombies. Just the right amount of graphic comic violence and gore. Just the right amount of edgy sexual humor and the standard fart jokes, which is exactly what you'd want and expect. It's kind of hard to discuss the story. I think it's kind of the same with like comedy movies. You can't really discuss humor in the same way you can discuss drama and serious stories. All I can really say is I found it funny. I thought the pace was right. The humor kept flowing throughout the duration of the game, and I never felt like it went on too long without some jokes, and it works really well. Like I said in the beginning, this is going to be a very divisive thing. It's South Park, and that seems like it's very love it or hate it. I loved it. I thought it was the perfect amount of humor, extreme comic violence, and fart jokes. I really liked how going from the USA to Canada was a shift to like a classic 8 or 16-bit style game, and that was just a nice touch. The story was fun. It was stupid, but it was full of laughs. It was nice to see a defined map of South Park, and it was great to see all the characters again in a kind of a different situation to what we see in the show. In terms of the game itself, RPGs honestly these days are kind of boring to me. The Stick of Truth makes an effort to make the combat more engaging through things like timed hits and letting you use items once a turn, which means you're always taking a combat action. That really speeds up the pace of battles compared to standard RPGs where healing would usually mean you're not actively making progress versus damaging the enemy. It often lets you skip battles via environmental hazards, which makes the pace of the game way faster unless you avoid all the kind of monotonous combat. This is kind of a hard one. I don't think South Park The Stick of Truth is a perfect game, but it works really well for what it is. I guess you could make some of the buddies more useful for certain setups and maybe a bit better balance. Butters just seems way better than the rest of the buddies. You know, maybe you could have multi-classing or class swapping, but I don't really think the game needed that. It's easy enough as it is, and I don't think it would have enough time to actually develop that in any meaningful way. It's a good game, and I don't really think it needed anything changed to be fun and successful like it is. Probably didn't need any kind of the button mashing sections. In some of Jimmy's attacks, you need to mash to get him through his stuttering sections, which is pretty funny, and I guess it fits pretty well. You know, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of RPGs these days, but I don't know if South Park The Stick of Truth could work in any other way. It's basically an extended parody that works better than most RPGs' combat systems, which is in itself pretty damn funny. It was a fun game, but your mileage is going to depend on whether or not you like South Park, which I've probably said about 3 or 4 times throughout this video. I think you'd be best served picking a class like Mage or Jew, because I found Jew to be significantly more fun and thoughtful to use than Fighter. It's fun to play, it's paced really well, and you're never really in a scenario where something feels unbeatable. If you're fighting the battles as they come, you're always prepared, which is great for the genre since most RPGs have some level of grinding, or you need to know the game like the back of your hand to avoid it. It's nice to be able to bypass battles via world hazards or just straight up running past dudes. The production values are top notch, and I think the best praise you can give it is that it feels exactly like a complimentary piece to the show. It's as if it was meant to be played immediately following the Black Friday episode, and that's fantastic if you're a fan. I'm looking forward to the sequel, The Shattered But Whole, which seems like it's making a lot of changes to make combat different, like grid-based movement, which should keep the game feeling fresh. Different is good, because the next game we're looking at is basically a Chinese bootleg.